Alright, a little while ago, I put out a little video after my NDAs were lifted on the fact that I'd played the expansion, telling people what had been going on. I was exhausted, and I said, look, just ask me questions down below, and at the end of the week, I'll do a big Q&A for you guys. That was yesterday, and it's become increasingly clear to me that you all have a lot of questions. In fact, 653 questions already. So I probably shouldn't wait till the end of the week. I'll probably do one of these every day from now on. I'm going to go to the earliest comments here, guys, and as your questions roll in, what I will do is just keep talking about the expansion for 20 minutes at a time. When we hit 20 minutes, we'll stop, and then we'll do another video later. You can leave more questions down below if you like to, and I will try to fill you in on as many gaps as possible. It's really interesting, actually. There's a lot of things that I learned about the demo, and the stuff we will be playing, not this coming weekend, but the one after, and about the elite specializations that just haven't made it into any of the content that I've done so far. Stuff like the new mechanic barrier for elite specializations, that scales your max capacity for barrier, scales based on your vitality. The amount you heal and apply barrier scales on healing power. The fact that the earth specialization has barrier available in it. The fact that there are going to be 4 stat combos in Path of Fire, and one of them might even only be triple stat. All that kind of crazy detail, that is the kind of stuff that hopefully you'll be able to get out of me through these Q&As. So without further ado, let's begin. Question 1's from Neroholic, who says, will you be able to have more than one mount, and can you ride them across whole of Tyria? How much or what will they cost? So, yes, you can have more than one mount. There's at least 4. I am now at liberty to talk about most of the leak stuff, guys, because it's not really so relevant anymore. Many months ago, it was actually leaked that there would be 5 mounts, and there's an extra one, a Griffin, which hasn't appeared in any of this pre-show stuff, and doesn't look like it's going to be a part of the expansion in the end. My suspicion is that Griffin, a lot of people have been wondering what that is, why that was there. My suspicion is that Griffin might actually be a Living World Season 4 thing. So let's talk a little bit about this. In Path of Fire, all of the mounts are mastery based, and there's going to be 4 masteries. Well, when we look at Living World Season 3, they added a new mastery line, right? Ancient Magic. So Season 4, presumably, will also have a mastery line. And then, therefore, will that new Season 4 mastery be a mount mastery? I think the answer is yes. And I actually think that what that means is when Season 4 starts, Episode 1 of Season 4, we will find a new mount, we'll find a Griffin. And in Episode 2, we'll learn to teach that Griffin something new. And Episode 3, it will teach something more and something more and something more. That's what they might do, or it could go in a completely different direction. But yeah, there's more than one mount. Yes, you can ride them across all of Tyria. People seem to be really surprised by this. I want everyone to be clear that mounts are something worthwhile for the new expansion because they've built the maps to work with them. Core Tyria obviously has tons of waypoints. You don't need any of the mount abilities to traverse the landscape. So mounts are kind of pointless for Core Tyria, but in terms of cosmetics and in terms of just being a mount lover if you happen to be one, in terms of, from ArenaNet's perspective, players running around in Core Tyria and then exciting free-to-play players into buying the expansion. For all these reasons, mounts totally work in core areas. If you think about Heart of Thorns, we got gliding, and then they added gliding to core maps a little bit after the expansion when they saw that it was fine. Same thing with mounts. You might find that certain jumping puzzles, mounts are disabled, just like gliding was disabled in Core Tyria, but generally speaking, yeah, they let you ride the mounts, they let you do everything everywhere. You can glide in the desert even if the desert doesn't specifically have anything designed for gliding, and the same is true for mounts. You can probably ride your mounts in the Maguma jungle too if you want. So yeah, and there's 4, maybe 5. Next question on the list was from Royal, who comes up to quite a lot of the streams and has a really interesting point that sparked a lot of discussion. I mentioned there was a business model shift. It wasn't really quite a shift, but the kind of surprise for a lot of us with this expansion is if you buy Path of Fire, it does not have Heart of Thorns bundled with it. So you will have such a thing as Path of Fire only accounts. Now, Path of Fire has the Renegade Elite Specialization, but that is for the Revenant, which is a Heart of Thorns profession. And so the question is Revenant just a Heart of Thorns profession, or does Revenant also come with Path of Fire? I actually don't know the answer to this, but I would assume that what we think of as Revenant is just an expansion class. Whatever expansion you go for, I think you get Rev unlocked. That's the way I would assume they're doing it, but I don't think there's been any official information on that one. Great question, though, and that starts to touch on some of the really interesting ways in which this business decision will affect their future design. You know, the idea of adding New Hawk Wallows to desert maps is a weird one now, because there will be people who could never do that without buying Heart of Thorns. So do they do it? Do they not do it? That's a lot of fun stuff to talk about, so we will get into that over time. This is a pretty crappy question, but a lot of people have asked it, and it kind of benefits me to talk about it, so I will. Ryan Gibson says, it might just be me, but when I try to use your POF expansion buy link, I wind up at a this page isn't working thing. Yeah, ArenaNet are having a lot of technical issues, and I think a lot of people are running into stuff like that. If you hold off on your pre-purchase for a little bit, hopefully they'll have that worked out. I don't know how many clicks have been lost and stuff, but that's happening a lot. If people have had that error, I'm really sorry about that. Most people probably already made their purchase and it doesn't matter, but I have had a ton of questions about that. Don't worry, it is the correct link. It will just trigger later. Amion Black says, is Unbound Magic still a relevant and key currency in Path of Fire at vendors and in the world, or is there a new world currency floating about? Yeah, as far as the story's concerned, there should be Unbound Magic around. And if in this expansion we kill Kraukatoric, which I don't know, by the way, all I played is the demo that showcases early stuff in the story. I have not been to all the late maps. But presumably, yeah, Unbound Magic could become a thing again, but I think it was really a Season 3 thing, and a Season 3 currency, and I think we're moving away from it. I didn't see that at all anywhere in the Crystal Desert, and I would be surprised to see it. Unbound Magic is about Season 3, and ultimately, as we've seen from Episode 6, it's about getting the legendary trinket Aurora. That said, I do think that there should be a replacement for Unbound Magic. You guys might have picked up on this during Season 3, Episode 6 I certainly felt as well. I like those maps. I like being able to walk around and actually collect Unbound Magic as a currency by walking over to it and it's sort of absorbing it, kind of like a collectathon action-adventure game you might expect. You know, I like that experience of seeing the item physically out on the world, walking over, and then it disappears as I claim it. And I think that that doesn't just have to be Unbound Magic. There could be any number of other substitute things, urns filled with gold that you walk over to and you grab them in that way. I would really like it if the expansion maps had some replacement for that part of the map experience that Unbound Magic gave us. But for the demo and what I played, I didn't see the devs doing it. They have other interesting things going on, like bounties and identification and stuff, which we can talk about as people ask the questions. But Unbound Magic, I think we will lose something for seeing that go away. Mayroom's Dagon, clear Elder Scrolls reference in his name there, says, list all of the Spellbreaker skills and traits and so on with description, please. I cannot do that, and I just want to clarify to everyone, I want to give you a bit of a story about this. I can't do that because I have basically shoddy footage of a lot of the Elite Specialization stuff. Let me just explain why as well, guys. When I went into this to collect the footage and stuff, I really didn't know what the situation would be like. We had a couple of hours to work on this stuff, but no real definite end, because there are a lot of interviews you'll be seeing going up on my channel, and we didn't know how long the interviews were going to be. Didn't know if I'd have space between interviews to get back to capturing footage. So basically, I go in front of the client. I started to check things out and start geeking out about things, but mostly I had kind of a lot of people having conversation with me. It was mostly me having really in-depth, deep talks and basically being a fan of the game while the client was running in the background, you know, minutes and minutes and minutes at a time of just idling, basically. I really don't think I did a very good job with the Elite Specialization stuff. If I get this opportunity again in another 2 years, I promise you I will do much better with it. But unfortunately, you kind of got sporadic and scattershot traits being moused over and skills being moused over, and some of the really cool stuff I saw I didn't even record, and I do apologize. I just wasn't prepared for the kind of environment it would be or how to manage my time, because it was very indeterminate. I didn't know if I had 1 hour left, you know, 5 minutes before it all closed. I didn't know that it was going to close in 5 minutes. It could have been another 3 hours for all I knew, because I just didn't know where I'd be able to squeeze time in. So I do apologize, but that's hopefully gives you a gist and impression of what it was like at the day. I just kind of went in a bit unprepared. I have no excuse beyond the fact that I'm fairly new to this. Ifrix says, we saw on Guild Wars 2's YouTube that there is a new guild hall in POF. Is this the only hall? And are there any other guild updates / features that you saw? So I did talk to the guild team a little bit, but I don't recall if I got any really tangible changes to guild stuff. You know, I've got laundry lists of things that I think that the guild features need. It is crazy for me to compare this expansion with the Heart of Thorns one. I will just point out, when we went into Heart of Thorns, I was very clear with the community. I said, listen, you think you want guild halls, but they really might not be useful in this MMO. It's a very different game. And I think that ArenaNet, though there have been mistakes with guild halls, really blew it out of the park with the guild hall system in Heart of Thorns. They added so much stuff, they put so much effort into it, and none of that seems to have mattered, because 2 years later, Path of Fire comes out, and you know, the fact a new guild hall comes in is just something people are laughing at, and they're like, oh yeah, who cares about guild halls? Guild halls are cool, and they should be cool. It's kind of like a 180 or a reverse has happened. I was originally the guy saying, oh, I don't think the MMO needs it. It's just nostalgia that you guys care about when you're applauding massively for it. And now these days, everyone's like, yeah, they're not that important. And I'm like, come on, they could be great. And I want more information, and most people are sort of looking the other way. It's crazy to see that difference, that complete reversal. I wish I had more information for you, except the fact that this guild hall is deliberately more localized. Not necessarily that the map is smaller, but a lot of the key features and services and things you get in the hall are much more tightly packed centrally. So I think that this is a worthwhile hall for smaller communities, which is exactly what I think people are looking for. Unfortunately, the Claw Island Dream and stuff has not been a thing in Path of Fire. Ryan Gibson says, one of the biggest questions I have is, are there any additions or changes to professions that really fill the heal / support role? Druid and Tempest kind of dominate that sector, and I was wondering if there's anything else coming. Well, the Scourge, if you've watched the post show, you'll know this already. The Scourge, I think, could really fill a new niche for support. It depends how they design the raid and fractal stuff. We're speaking from a PvE perspective here. If there are such things as global nukes that cannot be dodged, cannot be distorted, cannot be blocked, and they're like percentage-based hits, like 80% of your max health you will take as damage. The only way to mitigate stuff like that will be through barrier. And Scourge is great at barrier, so you're going to see new support opportunities there. We've also seen that barrier is in the core classes. There's a rebalance happening to all of the core stuff. Elementalist in Earth Attunement, for example, gets barrier. We know that Weaver has barrier too, but just core Ellie has barrier. I believe that there's a new Grandmaster, maybe was it, or something, that procs barrier on you at a certain health threshold, or when you swap to Earth Attunement. It's something like that. We also know that there's going to be big signet changes, and just generally across the board, they're reshuffling things. So if you look at the core spec, now I don't know this 100% because Christ, I barely had the time to look at the new set of elite specs, let alone all the other balance in the game. But if you look at all of the core specs, I would say most of those defensive lines, like Earth, those specializations are a bit weak. And I think that if any other class deserves barrier and has these extra support opportunities through barrier, I think Guardian's a good idea, and I would be very excited to see if their defensive line maybe gets a bit of barrier in it as a core thing. So I do see new opportunities. I really do see new opportunities for extra support stuff. And I hope the devs keep pushing that area of the game. GoGoXZQ says, how do you feel about the scope of the different elite specs and how ArenaNet made it so that the new ones don't make the old ones redundant? I think the answer to this question is to have them have very well-defined niche uses. You know, one elite spec should be to do with power, one should be to do with Condi, one should be to do with support, and so on and so on and so on. We've seen that they don't always seem to do that. So, like, sometimes that can be to the game's detriment too. With Heart of Thorns, I think it's good design, and I think it's smart spacing out and portioning of things that the Scrapper was clearly a PvP thing. And, you know, it really shone in competitive PvP and World versus World with its stomp mechanics and stuff. But it suffered in PvE for a long time. Like, people didn't really do that. They felt like core NGs. Now Warriors are going to have that experience, I think, in Path of Fire. I think that the Spellbreakers are going to be kind of like the new Scrapper. And that might kind of suck for Warrior mains right now, but I think, broadly speaking, across all of Guild Wars 2, this is what they need to do to have a world where Spellbreaker has its place, and Berserker has its place, and the next thing has its place, and so on and so on and so on. So sometimes they've been quite smart, but then you look at stuff like the Scourge, and the Scourge is both a Condi spec and a support spec, and I think it should really be one or the other. Maybe when X-Pac 3 comes out, we'll see they rein away the Condi stuff. We shall see. And then sometimes they just throw caution to the wind and they don't give a crap at all. Like they kind of did with Tempest, and like they probably have done with Weaver. You know, Weaver is a clear fan favorite right now. A real showstopper. Everybody's loving Weaver. But in terms of like smart design and giving these things particular places, I'm a bit worried about Weaver. I mean, frontline Condi Bruiser is where I think it should be, and hopefully they'll continue to push it in that direction. But with so many new skills across so many weapons, it's kind of hard to anticipate, right? RJD20 says, do you think the new zones will be event rich while you're running through? I only saw the Raptor race event. Also, do you believe world bosses will still be a thing? I remember in the Heart of Thorns trailer that the world bosses beside the Wyvern were not shown. Could that be the case here as well? Amazing job. Now, I think there will be metas. I just don't know much about the metas of these maps. And when we talk about like large metas and world boss metas, it's going to be really interesting in POF because they're enormous maps. So if you have like a global meta like the Gerent or whatever, that's now affecting such a huge play space because there's such massive maps now. I don't know what they'll do with the event density. I think it's different strokes for different folks, and maybe they'll just go for that with the maps. Maybe some maps will be much more dense and much more hostile and tons of events going on, and some will be more casual and laid back. We played the first expansion map, which, if any, should probably be the one that's a bit more laid back, and that might explain why you saw less events there. But I felt like the density was okay. You might have noticed it feels like there's less enemies around as well. You know, exploration's going to be different. The pacing's going to be different now that we've got mounts and we're moving faster and going across, covering more distance with less events. You know, these are really interesting things to think about. When we hear, oh yeah, the new maps, they're going to be the full size of Heart of Thorns plus Living World Season 3. Remember, but you're going to be traversing that a bit faster and it might be a bit more empty just to give this idea of a desolate, barren landscape in a desert. Seeing how these things all play together is going to be interesting. And I think what I'm trying to say here is just because there might be less events and there might be less mobs around, that might be a service to the game. As I say, different strokes for different folks, and I would expect this earlier one to be a little bit less crazy adrenaline all the time. Chris says, hey WP, do you know how many story chapters there are going to be? Actually, I don't. I have got some interviews with you guys, with about narrative and about scope and about deciding how long you spend on stories and stuff like that. And we'll hear from the ArenaNet devs in the coming days about that in those interviews. But in terms of like very specifically, does it have 4 acts like Heart of Thorns did? How many instances is it per act? How many achievements per act? And all of that stuff, I don't know. Remember as well though that story chapters, and particularly when we deal with instances now, we have to judge a little differently now because they've got you know, different boundaries. They can dynamically move the boundary for how long and how big an instance is. We saw in Living World Season 3 that huge amounts of story take place in the open world now. So yeah, it's a really weird Q&A, and the answer is I'm ignorant, but there you go. You know, I want to show you guys the depths of my ignorance here. And you know my hopes. I hope that it's at least like 3 times as long as Heart of Thorns. I think they need that breathing room to tell a great story. We will see whether they pull that off in 2 years of dedicated development, shall we? Darkshine101 says, how will gliding work for my friends? I'm trying to get them to play the game. So if they buy only the expansion Path of Fire, then they'll get mounts and all of those masteries, but they won't get Living World Season 3 masteries and Heart of Thorns masteries, which includes mushrooms and gliding and stuff like that. If you want to be able to both glide and ride mounts and do cool combo plays and stuff because of that, you need both expansions. And if you're going to do that, bear in mind they give you a discounted price to buy both together. So I would advise to your friends to do that instead of, you know, buying one and then a few months later buying Heart of Thorns, because they're going to feel gypped out by that. Also, you may as well get both together so that they can experience the Heart of Thorns story and Living World stuff to lead into the desert, no? Or are they just going to skip ahead? I suppose it's up to them. WP, do you think that after we fly into the Crystal Desert that the Ebonhawk gates will open for you to just walk down into, or do you think they will be closed forever? Now, I'm not sure about this. I've got a few speculations. That perhaps it's going to be Living Worlds, or perhaps those gates will actually be the entrance to the Crystal Desert Guild Hall or something, or maybe just one of the core 5 maps gives us an alternate route down. But the story 100%, guys, does not start going through those gates. I know it's a bit unfortunate, but I think the other entrance they went with is cool. You know, we've got a Guild Wars 1 entrance. We go through the sea or over the sea. We get this badass airship cutscene. I think that's way better than just watching the Ebonhawk gates open. I hope that the Owl scene from the Black Citadel, and I hope that Ebonhawk stuff is paid off on in the expansion, but I don't know that stuff just yet. Cyan1998 says, WP, how well do you think the theme of our new elite specializations fits into the Crystal Desert? Like they explained in the announcement that the Scourge kind of rebels against Palawa Joko and is tied into the lore quite well. Do you think they managed to hit that sweet spot lore on more classes? I actually really do. I've got some cool stuff to show you guys. But I've actually moused over the Elite Specialization collections. You remember these collections you get that gives you like the special weapon at the end of the adventure? With Heart of Thorns, those were filled with like a bunch of really arbitrary things like, oh, Stealth Glide on the class, and oh, Killer Treasure Mushroom. For this, for the next expansion, for Path of Fire, they did really well. As you progress through that, you get all your trinkets and their appropriate stats, and they're all smart. They're all really interesting extra things and interactions with the game world. I've been very impressed by it. Also, of course, if you guys watch the post show, you will know that when you're exploring the desert, you will find representatives of your elite specialization. Like you can meet an elite Mirage out in the world, and she'll talk to you about Mirage magic, and there's all kinds of little ties like that. Even tooltips and things seem to suggest interesting stuff. The Scourge has an elite that references the realm of torment. I think they did really well on this one, and I think that that's a criticism of Heart of Thorns that they've properly answered. Of course, we won't know for sure. I could be overhyping it, I'm overselling it for now. But what I played in the demo, I was impressed, and I think they did well. Royal again asking me which elite specialization I'm most excited for and what do I think about the story so far. Was it like leading, season 2 was the Heart of Thorns, or was it a bit off since the X-Pac team and Living World team don't work together? Two good questions. Now, my most favorite elite special, I think really, in terms of like design and actually having the hands-on, I really think it might be Spellbreaker. Just because it does seem so cool, and specifically from a PvP perspective. Weaver scares me. It's very exciting and flavor-wise, it's interesting, but it also scares me. Weaver to me is a lot like, if you guys watched the Elite Speculation video I did with Boots, where we were inventing our own warrior, you know, I cheesily won that and got the popular vote just because I gave it a great axe. It had nothing to do with my design. It was just, oh yeah, great axe, this is really exciting. I think that's why people like Weaver right now, and from like a real balance perspective, I don't know, it scares me. Spellbreaker I think is really well-rounded, and I'm very interested in. I also love the Paragon influences on it and so forth. As to your other questions, what do I think about the story so far? I thought it was really good. I liked, a lot of people were kind of sneering at the idea of having a heart in the middle of the story. I thought it worked well, and I thought it paced the story out well. They could continue to use that technique terribly, but from what I saw, I actually really quite enjoyed it. I think that they've hit a nice pace. Now, the question of rolling season 3 into the expansion, well, it didn't feel too bad to me, but I actually think where we've seen the negatives of that is actually with episode 6, rather than Path of Fire. Episode 6, you haven't heard my criticisms about episode 6 just yet, and you haven't heard what I think about it, but I think where we see any scoping issues, they have been reflected in the finale more than they have been reflected into Path of Fire. Hopefully for the next Living World season, those don't come up, and I'll have more details on that in a couple of weeks when we get back to talking about episode 6. There's too much going on with the game right now, guys. Sabar0748 says, hey WP, will there be mushrooms, Oak essence, etc. in the new maps? It's been something I've been wanting to know since the announcement. Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier. I think it's a really interesting thing to go into. I haven't seen any of those. I would love to, at the end of Path of Fire, as a cool little Easter egg, find a new Hokwallow that I can dive through, because I'm a dedicated player who's also finished all the Heart of Thorn stuff, and I get to go to some special little area like the Burnisher Quarry, or I find an extra little jumping puzzle or something. I think that would be awesome, but in terms of the way the developers have to work, I don't know, that's diminishing returns on the amount of response they get from doing that, right? Because it's now just a smaller slice of the community that they can appeal to. So I don't know how they will do it. I would love to see more of those things in there. And especially, like, look at Living World Season 3. Look at that Kodan Mastery. Look at the Draconis Mons Mastery. Look at the Siren of Ore Mastery. Are these really forever only going to be on one map? Ugh, that would be kind of sucky. And those kind of problems with the mastery system, unfortunately, are still there in Path of Fire. It didn't have... I think while Elite Specializations answered a lot of criticisms, particularly in the lore department, a lot of my criticisms of the mastery system are just left to fester still. And that's been a bit of a disappointment to me. Diego Vega says, the only thing I'd like to know is how many new pets does the Ranger get? I've seen 2 already, and I hope there are more to collect. I think that they're going to be going for 4. That was what I believe was happening. And I think Eboga is one of them, and maybe Lion is another one. That's the extent of my knowledge. The community might know more than me at this point, because some other streams have happened where people have compiled information I just didn't get. But that's the extent of my understanding for today. Next question, Matthias Dietrich says, how will we unlock the new elite specializations? Will it be like in Heart of Thorns, where we start the expansion and can instantly put our account as hero points into it? Or will there be some kind of unlock quest? The hero wheel is still there, and I believe it will still be using this currency. There don't seem to be any substantive changes. Back with the leaks, and this is absolutely true, we saw that they've structured things slightly differently though. So in Heart of Thorns, if you were a daredevil, you had to do tons of stuff before you finally got your Grandmaster Dodge trait, and it finally felt like you had your elite specialization. You weren't fully powered for a long time. So what they've done in Path of Fire is you sort of tunnel vision very quickly through an entire trait line. So you get all your traits. You get all the way up to a Grandmaster trait super early. And so it feels a lot more rewarding to unlock your elite specialization now a lot quicker. But I think one thing the developers absolutely need to do before this release comes out is explain to people what their view is for elite specializations. Is it a progression system? Are you embracing it as a progression system, or are you not? What do we expect from hero points? And I guess by the time everybody gets to play the demo, we will see. Unfortunately, I didn't look too much into that, but that's an overhanging question that I think is perfectly valid because people have different expectations right now. I love the idea of elite specializations as a progression system. I think it's so fun to explore new areas of the map and have meaningful things to do that actually tangibly unlock new stuff for my character, and I get that nice steady learning curve instead of everything thrown at me all at once. I think these are all brilliant ideas that should be embraced, but not everyone in the community has that opinion. Some people just want their stuff instantly. Welcome to MMO Cultures in 2017. Jan OPD says, hey WP, question of mine, do you or your mount get falling damage when you are riding on a mount? The answer is no, but you get kicked off of your mount. So one of the first things I ever saw in the footage you've been watching, hopefully in the background today, is people jumping off of buildings and things. Their mounts land and they don't really take any damage. But if you then would be at a point where you take fatal damage, you'll fall off of the mount, but otherwise be okay. Your mount will also proc full damage traits, by the way. So if you're a an elementalist that's running the full damage trait and you're in air attunement, you will fall off of a giant cliff, and when your raptor lands, it will still strike the ground around it, a big static field, and you'll fall off of your raptor. It's very, very, very cool. A question from Syverin, who says, WP, how do you feel about the basically useless Q&A you had with Mo? It was obviously just a rehashing of what was posted on the Reddit AMA and on the main website with just more words about the same thing. How do you feel about the weird thing he said about the Zaitan fight? I actually love that he mentioned the Zaitan fight. I thought that was awesome. I was really humbled that he'd even listened to the crap I had to say about that. I would love a remake of the Zaitan fight, and I think that that's, one of those big sticking points about Guild Wars 2's history. That's one of the big things that is like, you'd expect the devs to be very evasive about, but everybody knows, and it's kind of this ugly blemish. The fact that Mike was so comfortable to just come out, unprompted essentially, and talk about that, that's really great to me. I really, really enjoyed that. To me, that was actually the highlight of the interview. And not just because it showed he'd been watching some of my content, but because he happily, willingly offered up a difficult topic. The theme of all the interviews that I have gone into here is that I want them to draw comparisons to the mistakes of the past and say how much better the game is now and how Path of Fire has learned from the mistakes of the past. And I mentioned mistakes of the past essentially in that question, and he talked about the Zaitan fight and essentially said, listen, the difference these days is if we want to do something, we're taking the time to do it right. What he's basically saying there is, yeah, if you see more Elder Dragon fights, we will be doing good Elder Dragon fights. I thought that was a great answer. As for it being sort of rehashing of what was posted on the Reddit AMA, I'm not a great interviewer, or I'm kind of new to interviewing. I don't really know how to deal with it if you're interviewing someone and they essentially just waffle about a bunch of stuff. I don't know whether I've got the balls to just cut them off and say, no, you need to get to the nub of it. And of course, I took that interview before the Reddit AMA. I really thought I was sitting on a bit of a bombshell for a while. I was like, wow, man, he's sort of suggesting that Mike Z might become game director, and nobody's heard that. And wow, that's going to be in my interview. And then he sort of preempted it with the Reddit AMA. So it kind of took the wind out of its sails a little bit, but I'm proud of the interview. I think it was a nice interview. And there's a reason I showed that on the post show. It's because to me, that is one of the fluffiest interviews I have. I think you guys are really going to enjoy some of the talk I have with the balance team about the elite specializations, what they were aiming for with them, strengths, weaknesses, and other stuff too. You know, I talked to some environment guys that worked on Nightfall 10 years ago, and now they're making that same region of the world again in 2017 and talking about what it was like working on it in both scenarios. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the interviews. 2 more questions because we've already gone well over. First one's very easy to answer. Arturas EU says, are there going to be new raids in the expansion? I'm worried because they haven't said anything about it, and raids are my favorite content at the moment. I've got this question so much. Please listen, guys. Please share this to people as much as possible. Yes, there will be raids. There will also be new fractals for what it's worth. There will also be world versus world and PvP updates. Those things aren't getting bundled into expansions, though. They are just perpetually going out. They're a part of the game. And so that's why they don't appear, you know, on the Path of Fire thing. Technically speaking, I think you will need Path of Fire to access those new raids, because those new raids will presumably use mounts and will have mounted combat sections in raids and all that kind of fun new stuff, and the raids will be set adjoining on desert maps and all that cool stuff will probably be going on. So you'll need POF, but they're not talking about the live updates as, you know, parts of the bulk of the expansion. None of that stuff was mentioned. It doesn't mean that it won't be going into Guild Wars 2. There's no way that they'll be cancelling raids, seriously. And so with that question handily dealt with, we'll go for one more. I'm only a tiny fraction of the way through the original 600, but if you guys want to ask more questions, feel free to drop them in the comments down below, and I'll try and pick really good ones. Maybe what you guys should be doing is upvoting, thumbing up the questions you really care about, and I'll try to discern a little bit more carefully via that. But the final question here from El Leduc, who says, I know you've been asked which elite specialization you are most excited for, but which one has surprised you the most? Absolutely, without a doubt, Weaver. Weaver is ridiculous. The amount of skills that they have added there, it's insane. I mentioned this on the post show. Weaver is really what happens when you get 2 full years to make an elite specialization, and there's no Revenant muddying, you know, there's no new class as well muddying the waters. Anyone who's disappointed by the idea that there's not a new class in Path of Fire doesn't understand the scope of these elite specializations and what Guild Wars 2 of today is. Elite specializations can do everything a new class would do and then some, right? 40 plus new skills. It is crazy. And they can hit the theme of any new class at the same time. Weaver, I never would have expected that. Weaver, you know, if I had ever been an Elementalist balance dev, I would have been the most boring bastard you can imagine. I would be terrified to even give them an offhand. I'd be finding ways to worm out of that just so that I can add as few skills as possible. This Weaver, it's a celebration of what there is to love about Ellie, and that's having billions of skills. And I think that, you know, the community is right to be excited about it because they really went balls deep with it, and it's astounding to me. That was a huge surprise. So yeah, there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching. We'll continue with these Q&As. I'm going to try and give you guys the most information I can, the best information I can as we lead up. If you are interested in picking up the game, I have a link in the description that really helps me if you use it, if you pick it up for yourself or a friend or whatever. And until next time, looking forward to more questions, everybody. I will see you tomorrow. Catch you later.